Alright, so hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and today I want to talk a little bit about the new sort of meta light attack setup for melee, because I thought it would be better to simply cover the build and then give you the parameters the melee weapon needs to hit to use it, rather than to go through each melee weapon separately. So here's what the new setup looks like. It's fairly similar to what we had before, and it's of course not set in stone. You can play around with it, but if you want to get some big dig damage, this is definitely the way to go. So probably the biggest difference now is that we're no longer using pressure point or primed pressure point, and we're using condition overload instead. This is just straight up superior to any of the pressure point mods if you can reliably proc at least 2 status effects on the enemies, and since this build focuses around slash and viral, we're going to be doing just that. It does introduce a little bit of a ramp up to some of the beefier enemies because you need to hit them at least once or twice to proc some status so the condition overload kicks in, but it's really not a big deal and it gives you far more damage than any of the pressure point mods. And if you don't have condition overload yet, don't worry, just replace it with one of the pressure point mods, which is not going to give you as much damage as Condi overload, but it's going to give you more than enough. Then we're going to put on blood rush to scale our crit chance as we build our combo counter, and for this to work and be worth it, I would say the weapon needs to have at least 20% crit chance or more. I wouldn't use this on a weapon that has a less than 20% crit. And then we're going to do the same thing but for status instead via weeping wounds, and for this to work and be worth it, I would say you need to have at least 15% status. If the weapon has less than 15%, it's going to be way too unreliable and your damage is going to be all over the place. Then if you don't mind only having 11 seconds on your combo, you can go with Gladiator Rush, which is also going to provide you with some extra crit chance via a mini blood rush effect on the set, but if you'd rather have longer combo duration, just go with body count instead. Though it's of course better to run with Gladiator Rush if you can, especially if you have some other Gladiator mods on your frame, because you're just gonna get more crit. Then we want to get some attack speed, or rather a lot of attack speed, so we're gonna use Berserker, which gives you the most attack speed per mod if you exclude Rivens, and it works really well because we're gonna be critting all the time thanks to Blood Rush. Then we're going to use Organ Chatter to scale our critical multiplier. This is a massive damage increase, so we definitely want to have that there, and we top it all off with Primed Fever Strike and North Wind for viral. Though you could of course put in dual stat mods to help with the initial ramp up of status, but in the long run it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense because things like Weeping Wounds that scale with the combo counter no longer use modified numbers or stats, but they use the base stats. Now the thing about this setup is that while it is extremely powerful and it scales really well, it practically has the longest ramp up it can, because you don't really start doing good damage until you reach 8 to 10 times combo multiplier, and you're only doing full damage after you reach 12 times combo multiplier. But on the other hand, once you do reach that 12 times combo multiplier, you're going to delete everything you touch. Now, I already kind of talked about the kind of stats the weapon needs to have for this to be worth it and for it to actually use this build, but I didn't cover all of them. So we know that the crit chance in my eyes needs to be at least 20%, and the status, once again in my eyes, needs to be at least 15%. But the weapon also needs to do primarily slash damage. And if it doesn't, you're gonna go for something like this instead, which uses corrosive instead of viral, which makes far more sense if you're proccing little to no slash. This also scales really well, but that has a lot to do with the Redeemer Prime just being an absolute monster. So if the weapon doesn't do at least 60% of its physical damage as slash, go for this setup instead. And finally, there is one more variant of this kind of meta setup that I actually consider to be the best, but the weapon you use for this is even more specific than for the first one. Because in addition to it having at least 20% crit chance and doing at least 60 or 70% of its damage as slash, it needs to have at least 30 or 35% status chance, and if you have a weapon like that, you can use this build instead. Now I know you might be like, yo dude, you're missing a mod, but bear with me, okay? So the structure of this is very similar. We once again start off with condition overload, which is going to provide us with more damage as we proc status on the enemy, and we're going to get all the crit we need with blood rush, which scales our crit chance as we build our combo counter. Then, however, we're going to use Drifting Contact, which is going to provide us with combo duration, but also some status chance, and we're once again going to use Berserker to scale our attack speed. The next mod is also the same as on the previous setup, it's Organ Chatter for crit multiplier, but we top it off with Vicious Frost and Virulent Scourge for viral damage and status. Now, since we already got all the status we need with dual stat mods and Drifting Contact, we don't need to use Weeping Wounds anymore, which opens up a mod slot where we can put either whatever we want or whatever the weapon needs. And we don't really care that the weapon actually does less damage because we're using dual stat mods instead of 90% elementals, because the majority of the damage is gonna come from slash. Now, some of the examples that you can put in the free slot are Healing Return if you want to get some healing from this, because this mod heals you every time you hit an enemy that has a status effect on them, or you could put in something like Primed Reach, which is especially great on weapons that have wide sweeping attacks like the ORTHOS Prime. Then if you feel like Berserker isn't giving you enough attack speed on its own, you can run Primed Fury, or what I would actually recommend, Gladiator Vice, which doesn't give you as much attack attack speed as Pride Fury, but it also gives you extra crit chance via the Gladiator set bonus. And this once again gets stronger and stronger the more Gladiator mods you have on your frame, because the set bonus is gonna get stronger. Or if the weapon you want to use this on doesn't have quite enough slash, you can put in Buzzkill, which isn't gonna give you more slash damage with the procs, but it's gonna make it so that slash is more likely to proc. Now this build, on top of generally being less forma intensive than the first one and also having more flexibility than the first one with the free slot in there, doesn't have as much of a ramp up as the first one because you're only ramping up crit. You don't have to ramp up status, which means that Condition Overload works from the very start. So while it still needs to ramp up the crit in order for it to do full damage, it does decent damage from the start. And of course, if you have a weapon that you really want to use but it doesn't quite have enough slash for this setup, you can once again go for the corrosive setup. It's just not gonna scale as well as this one. Now, I am not saying that these are the only builds you should ever use for light attacks, and I'm also not saying that if a weapon doesn't fit any of these builds, it's garbage. There's a ton of other stuff you can do with melee, like for example, right now, heavy attack builds are extremely powerful. Some weapons have forced procs, like rapiers have a forced slash proc, so status isn't as important, and you can play around with all of these kinds of different things and get good performance out of them. So please don't look at this as sort of the only way to do light attack melee and everything else is subpar, because that was not my intention. My intention with this video was to show you what works and explain how it works, and once you know that, once you understand how this works, you can scale pretty much any melee weapon in the game for light attacks anyway. And it even opens up what I consider to be the best door in this game. The door to what I love to do, which is stupid shit that still does good damage, because I know where to take out a little bit of serious and replace it with a tiny bit of silly. Now, there is one more thing I want to focus on, and that's slash and viral, because a lot of people know that slash and viral is really strong, in most cases the best, but they don't necessarily know why. So, the reason why slash procs are so good is because they do true damage, which means they bypass armor and shields. So it doesn't matter how much armor or shields the enemy has, it will bypass them and go straight for their health. And while that's not super noticeable if you're fighting low level enemies, if you're fighting like a level 150 bombard, it makes a hell of a difference. Because a level 150 bombard has 98% damage reduction from all the alloy armor. So bypassing all of that and going straight for their health is incredibly valuable. And the reason why viral damage is so strong, or rather viral procs, especially in combination with slash, is because they reduce the enemy health by 50% for 6 seconds. So that makes your slash procs do double damage, kind of indirectly, right? They're still doing the same amount of damage, but the enemy only has half their health. That's why viral slash setups are really strong, and why corrosive is the second best, because it just straight up removes armor every time it procs. But anyway, I think I've been blabbering for long enough, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.